So now we have Simon Moore from University of Cambridge and the CHERI Research Center. Simon has led CHERI hardware research since its earliest days. A professor at Cambridge, he continues to examine where CHERI is mature and where research can still deliver meaningful advances. So that's up to you now.
Thank you very much. So, So welcome. Yeah, well, I hope you were mind blown by the last talk. Actually, to follow up, there was a question about sale. So in fact, when we first started doing some work in the university on adding CHERI to a RISC-V model, we'd previously worked on MIPS and realized all the problems of not having a formal model. So actually, my colleague Peter Sewell and his team developed the RISC-V formal model in SAIL. So that originated here, and it is now the golden model at RISC-V International. So Louis Emile was trying to, my understanding is basically the SAIL model is ground truth. So if you verify against it. And so I think the work that was done on Chariot is fascinating because it's probably the most highly verified commercially available core today, and we're trying to do that with CVA6. Anyway, without further ado, I will get to the subject of my talk, which is so CHERI's been standardized, so why do we still need to do research? So I just thought I would, basically, it's a quick talk, just wanted to try and clarify what's going on, because obviously we've had various talks from people. Tarek's already talked about the standardization effort for CHERI for RISC-V, but also we've got research talk, there's development talks, and I think there can be a little bit of confusion here, so hopefully I will address that. So firstly, what's the sort of requirements from RISC-V International for standardization? Well, you need a compelling use case, and you need, the start of industrial adoption around this. Oh, thank you, John. Sorry, a bit dry. You need implementations in hardware and software support. You do need the specification in SAIL. It's one of the requirements now for standardization. You need simulation support, and you need a test suite in order to add something to the RISC-V architecture. Okay, so those are the requirements. So, and actually I think when I wrote this, Tarek's talk was later today, but actually it was yesterday. So we've got a backwards reference. So yeah, why do we think we can standardize CHERI for RISC-V? Well, actually many concepts central to CHERI are really well understood at this point. We understand things like, compressed capabilities. How can we represent bounds and permissions and so on in a format suitable for 32-bit and 64-bit machines? We thoroughly understand capabilities for spatial memory safety. As Robert mentioned in his talk, we've now got, collectively, we've got over 100 million lines of code using really strong memory safety, both in applications, including things like Chromium browser, and operating systems. So very, very thorough support in CHERI BSD, and increasingly thorough support in Linux, but also real-time operating systems as well. We've actually got pretty solid temporal memory safety. So we had a talk just a little bit earlier from Tarek and Alfredo. So that actually gives us best-in-class temporal memory safety. There's still room for improvement, by the way, but actually it's a very solid implementation. And we know what the hardware mechanisms are needed for it. And equally, we understand enough about capabilities for compartmentalization. Now, here is an interesting one. There's potentially interesting new software use cases, but we've settled on a set of hardware primitives that seem to be necessary and sufficient for compartmentalization. So because we now know so much and we've got so many examples of both hardware implementations and software, it's a great time to standardize them. Okay? So for all of these, we understand the ISA level additions required. We understand what's needed in the compiler, the linker, the debugger. and how to build applications, what the runtime systems look like, and what the operating systems look like. So this is why we're standardizing, okay? Okay, so we turn this around. So aren't we done? We've got all that done. Why do we need to do research? Well, I think it's sort of worth just reflecting what happens in industry in other areas. So let's just think about something even as simple as the humble page table. We've been doing virtual memory for, over 40 years now? And people have been footling around and adding additional bits. I mean, even just things like, dirty bits to track writes to pages, was introduced a while ago. We're obviously using page tables now for hypervisor support and so on. So, things are added to in time. So you have a base understanding of why you need to use a mechanism, and then you build on it. Moreover, we often sort of build new software models. I mean, if you think about it, a microprocessor doesn't really fundamentally understand what a process is. Okay, that's a software abstraction. Similarly, the processor doesn't know what a guard page is, and yet you can use page tables to give you, these additional security properties. Another interesting example, let's just think back to when Intel introduced SGX. They put it out there to solve certain security problems, and of course that's then spawned all sorts of research and refinements and all sorts of things. And similarly, even things like branch predictors, data prefetch, caching, and so on are still, we know how to do it, but there's also room for improvement, okay? And there are also things like alternative models of computation, and, we'll also want to do that. How do you build accelerators that make really thorough use of CHERI? Okay, so let's just think about ongoing investigations. So I'm just very high level, some of the things I know about. So rather than highlighting things to begin with from University of Cambridge, I thought I'd highlight things at Ericsson. So Ericsson's been doing some fun stuff. So they've got papers now out on conditional capabilities, things like blinded capabilities. So if you want data oblivious computation, for high security to reduce those sorts of attacks, they've introduced this new mechanism so that you can mark data that should never be used as part of a conditional branch, for example, and colored capabilities, and thinking more about revocation. As I said, we've already got best-in-class temporal memory safety, but we also know there's a bit of a performance overhead. It may only be a few percent, but we think we can do better. And moreover, for instance, in the microcontroller space, CHERI-RISC not only does use after reallocation mitigation, but it does full use after free. And there's an interesting question, can we do full use after free temporal memory safety for application class calls? And, we've been thinking about that in the university and have an initial proof of concept. We haven't published it yet because it's still very much a work in progress. And I said, we understand the base low-level mechanisms of how to do compartmentalization. And Dao Pang, who's here, has been doing a lot of work on library compartmentalization. And I think quite a lot of people have tried that out. It works very well. But we also believe there's lots of other compartmentalization models. Using the existing hardware mechanisms, lots of different software techniques to use them. And also, we'll need more sort of security evaluation tools. So if you do compartmentalization, did you put those compartment boundaries in the right place? What are the emerging security properties? We've got a pretty good idea for library compartmentalization, but as we start using it in other areas, there's clearly more that can be done. And finally, there's work going on, I believe some of it in Manchester, looking at single address-based operating systems for CHERI isolation. And that might be another interesting area. Today there's often a lot of pressure on TLBs because you're dealing with lots of different virtual address spaces, and the translation look-aside buffer in a processor just doesn't scale very well. So could we, for instance, use virtual memory for a single virtual address space, but then use CHERI for isolation. So you're using pages just for sort of bulk memory allocation and deallocation, and actually using CHERI throughout for protection. It's an interesting way to go. Anyway, I'll wrap up. So base CHERI architecture mechanisms are ready for standardization. This is why we're doing it. That's why we're making good progress. And the key thing here is we need silicon out there so that people can use it. So, it's fantastic to see the examples of silicon that are just outside at the moment, but we need more of it. We need more devices that people can build, and that's why we need standards so that we can push forwards with that, okay? We've already got many established use cases that use these hardware mechanisms, but moreover, just using that base set of hardware primitives, there are other models that can no doubt be built on top, okay? And finally, there are clearly, CHERI is very much a hardware-software co-optimization space, and what I'm hoping, what we really need to do is for CHERI to continue to be optimized so that it becomes more efficient. And we're already seeing with compartmentalization, for instance, that you actually get a big performance win over process-based compartmentalization. And I think that we need more wins like that because, to be frank, it's a whole lot easier in the industry to sell better performance than it is to sell better security, sadly. But if ideally we get both much higher security and higher performance, and that would be an amazing win. And with that, I'll finish early. Thank you.
Questions for Simon?
Cool. One thing I think we should focus on once we get through this initial set of ratification is increasing performance and really making use of the double width registers for much better computation, faster memcopy, and various other things. Because people tend to complain about the registers being double sized, but we should be able to really leverage that and make use of it.
Yeah.
What do you think, to turn it into a question?
Yeah, I agree. I think there's many areas where there could be refinements to the way we do things. I think the other thing that's interesting, which is a slightly hard one, is there are lots of software mitigation mechanisms currently in use that are probably just irrelevant when you start using CHERI. And that's also going to be a fascinating one because, and that's going to take sort of confidence building because, where people have got used to using things like address space layout randomization, we probably don't need it anymore. But people getting comfortable and having all the evidence data to back up, we can turn that off because we don't need it anymore, would also help with performance. That's also going to need quite a lot of engagement, I think, with the broader community.
Yeah, it's a start. Well, it's not just the start, 15 years, but it's a long journey I think we're on, and it's not going to end anytime soon.
No, but I think the key thing is we know so much now that we can actually build chips, we can build products, and then refine. And that's absolutely the key thing. And when working with Tarek, one of the things we've been trying very hard with the RISC-V standardization folk is say, because they keep saying, but don't you still need to do this, that, and the other? It's like, no. What we have now is sort of sufficient, so we can standardize it. Because without standards, you can't build products. Cool. Okay. Thanks, everybody.
So thank you very much.